I'm Ashley, 27, and I was reviewing marketing proposals when my phone buzzed. Mom's text read, "We changed all the locks. You don't have a home anymore." My fingers trembled as I typed back, "How funny how brave they think they are, haha." But inside, I was shattered. My grandmother's house, legally mine through her will, was being stolen by my own parents. I had no idea this inheritance would destroy my family. Before I tell you how this family nightmare started, let me know where you're watching from and subscribe if you've ever dealt with toxic family dynamics, because trust me, what happened next shocked even my lawyer. Growing up in Boston, I always thought my family was normal. Not perfect, but normal. My parents, Margaret and Robert, were hardworking middle-class people. Dad managed a bank branch and Mom taught third grade at the local elementary school. We lived comfortably in a modest suburban home, with family dinners most nights and annual vacations to Cape Cod. My younger brother Jason and I fought like typical siblings, but generally got along. But the heart of our family was always my grandmother Eleanor. She lived in a beautiful Victorian house in Cambridge that had been in our family for 3 generations. The house was where we celebrated every holiday, where I learned to bake cookies, and where I sought refuge during my turbulent teenage years. My grandmother was my confidant, my cheerleader, and often my protector when Mom's perfectionism became overwhelming. "You've always understood this house, Ashley," Grandma would tell me while we sat on her wraparound porch. "You see beyond the walls to the stories it holds." I didn't realize then how much those words would matter. When Grandma passed away last year at 92, our family was devastated. The reading of her will a month later changed everything. To everyone's surprise, especially my parents, she had left her house to me, with a letter explaining she believed I would preserve its history and character. "The house isn't just property," she'd written in her spidery handwriting. "It's our family story, and Ashley will honor that." My parents were visibly shocked. They had assumed the house would be sold and the proceeds split between them and their 2 children. Or, at minimum, that the house would go to them. My mother's face had gone pale, then flushed with anger as the lawyer read the will. "There must be some mistake," she'd said, her voice tight. Mother wasn't thinking clearly toward the end, but there was no mistake. The will was properly executed, witnessed, and notarized. My grandmother had been of sound mind. The house was legally mine. Initially, I tried to be conciliatory. "Nothing has to change," I told my parents over coffee the next day. "I want to preserve the house, not keep you from it. We can still have family gatherings there. I just want to honor Grandma's wishes." My best friend Leah warned me to be careful. "Your mom has always been controlling, Ash. And this is a lot of money we're talking about. That house must be worth over $1 million in today's market." "They're my parents," I insisted. "They'll come around once they process their grief." For a few months, things were tense but manageable. I moved into the house and began careful renovations, making sure to preserve its character while updating the plumbing and electrical systems. I invited my family over regularly, though my mother would often find fault with my changes. "Your grandmother kept that wallpaper for 40 years, she'd say, running her fingers along the new paint in the dining room. Or, "Those curtains don't match the period of the house at all." Jason tried to play peacemaker. "Mom's just having a hard time with change," he told me after a particularly tense Sunday dinner. Dad, too. They had plans for retirement that involved selling this place. I understood their disappointment but stood firm. Grandma wanted me to keep the house in the family. I'm honoring her wishes. The real trouble began when I announced my plans to convert part of the house into a small art gallery featuring local artists. The spacious front parlor was perfect for exhibitions, and it would provide additional income to maintain the aging property. I shared this idea at a family dinner 2 weeks ago. My father immediately objected. "That's a residential neighborhood. You can't just open a business there." "Actually, I can," I explained. "I've already checked with the city. With limited hours and proper permits, it's allowed under the historical building exemption." My mother pushed her plate away. You're going to ruin this neighborhood with traffic and strangers tramping through. Is that what you want? It's not going to be like that, Mom. It's a small, curated gallery. Maybe 3 or 4 visitors at a time, by appointment only. The argument escalated until my father finally raised his hand. Enough. It's Ashley's house. If she wants to make foolish decisions, that's her right. I thought that meant acceptance, however reluctant. My parents left shortly after, and I felt hopeful that we'd reached a turning point. Jason lingered behind. They'll come around, he said, helping me with the dishes. Just give them time. I believed him. I had no idea what they were actually planning. I had to fly to Chicago for a 3-day marketing conference. The presentation I'd been working on for months went brilliantly, and I'd secured a major new client for our agency. I was in high spirits as my flight landed back in Boston. Can't wait to sleep in my own bed tonight, I texted Leah from the airport. I took an Uber directly to the house, dragging my suitcase up the front steps. When my key didn't work in the lock, I assumed it was just sticking. The door was over 100 years old and sometimes needed a little coaxing. But after several attempts, I realized something was wrong. That's when I noticed the new deadbolt. My heart started pounding as I dug out my phone and called my mother. No answer. I tried my dad. Straight to voicemail. I was about to call Jason when my phone buzzed with a text from my mom. We changed all the locks. You don't have a home anymore. This house belongs to the family, not just you. I stared at the screen in disbelief. My fingers shook as I typed back, how funny how brave they think they are, haha. I was trying to sound confident, unbothered. Inside, I was crumbling. Standing on the porch of my own house, the house my grandmother had legally left to me, I felt like I couldn't breathe. I called Jason. Did you know about this? I demanded when he answered. About what? He sounded genuinely confused. Mom and Dad changed the locks on Grandma's house. They've locked me out of my own home. There was a long pause. Oh, Ash. I'm sorry. I didn't know they were going to do that. Where are they? I need to talk to them right now. They went to the Cape for the weekend. They won't be back until Sunday night. My mind raced. It was Friday evening. Where was I supposed to go for 2 days? Jason, can you come let me in? You must have a key. Another pause. I don't, Ash. And even if I did, look, I can't get in the middle of this. They're really upset about your gallery plans. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This is my house, Jason. Legally. They can't just lock me out. Maybe you should give them some time to cool down. Stay with a friend for the weekend. I hung up and sank down onto the porch steps, feeling utterly betrayed. Not just by my parents, but by my brother too. That's when I noticed the garbage bags. 3 large black trash bags were piled next to the bushes. I opened one and found my clothes hastily shoved inside. The second contained my toiletries and bathroom items. The third held framed photos, books, and some personal mementos. They had packed up my life and put it out with the trash. I called Leah, trying to keep my voice steady as I explained the situation. I'm coming to get you, she said immediately. You're staying with me tonight. While waiting for Leah, I sat guard over my bags, afraid my parents might have told neighbors I was trespassing. Every car that drove by made me tense up. When Leah arrived, she helped me load everything into her car. This is insane, she kept saying. They can't legally do this. I know, I said numbly. But they did it anyway. At Leah's apartment, I discovered several important things were missing. My grandmother's jewelry box, which contained not only heirloom pieces, but also the original copy of her will, my birth certificate and passport, and a leather-bound journal my grandmother had kept about the house's history. These weren't items I'd overlooked. They had deliberately not been packed. That night, lying on Leah's uncomfortable pull-out couch, I cried until I had no tears left. The betrayal felt physical, like a knife between my ribs. These were my parents, the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. Instead, they had thrown me out like an unwanted tenant. I thought about breaking a window to get back into my house, but realized that would only escalate the situation and potentially give them legal grounds against me. I needed to be smarter than that. The next morning, Jason called. I talked to Mom and Dad, he said. They're not budging. They think you've been selfish about the house. Selfish? It's my house, Jason. Grandma left it to me. They feel like you're disrespecting the family by turning it into a business. Dad says if you just agreed to sell it and split the money, none of this would be happening. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So this is about money? They're willing to throw their daughter out on the street for money. It's not just about money, Ash. It's about respect. They think you don't care about what they want. And what about what Grandma wanted? What about respecting her wishes? Jason sighed. Look, I'm trying to help here. If you apologize and agree to discuss selling the house, I think they might let you back in. Apologize? For what? For legally owning property that was left to me? For wanting to honor our grandmother's wishes. You're not making this easier, Ash. I'm not trying to make it easier. I'm trying to understand how my family could do this to me. After I hung up, Leah put her arm around me. You need a lawyer, Ash. Like yesterday. She was right. This wasn't going to be resolved with a family discussion. My parents had crossed a line, and I needed legal protection. That first weekend of displacement was one of the hardest periods of my life. I felt completely abandoned by my family, unsure of my next steps, and terrified about my future. But beneath the hurt and confusion, something else was beginning to emerge: determination. They had no right to take what was legally mine. No right to discard me like this. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. On Monday morning, I called in sick to work and began researching attorneys who specialized in property law. By noon, I had an appointment with Sophia Chin, a highly recommended lawyer whose online reviews praised her combination of professionalism and compassion. Sophia's office was in a converted brownstone downtown, with warm lighting and comfortable furniture that put me slightly at ease. She listened intently as I explained the situation, taking occasional notes and asking clarifying questions. When I finished, she leaned forward, her expression serious. First, I want to be clear. What your parents did is illegal. It's called self-help eviction, and it's against the law even if they were the legal owners, which they're not. You have the deed and the will, correct? My stomach dropped. The original will was in my grandmother's jewelry box, which my parents didn't pack. But I have a copy the attorney sent me after the reading. Sophia nodded. That's a start. We'll request the official copy from probate court. What about the deed? Same situation. But the transfer was recorded with the county. Good. We can get those records easily. She typed something into her computer. Here's what we need to do immediately. File for an emergency injunction to restore your possession of the property, then pursue damages for the illegal eviction and the missing personal property. The word damages made this suddenly feel very real. I was going to have to sue my parents. I just want my house back, I said quietly. Sophia's expression softened. I understand this is difficult. These are your parents. But they've chosen to handle this illegally rather than through proper channels. We need to protect your interests. I agreed, and she began drafting the necessary paperwork. I signed several documents, and she promised to file them that afternoon. In the meantime, she advised, document everything. Any communication from your parents or brother, any expenses you incur because of this situation, anything missing from your belongings. And don't contact them directly if you can avoid it. Everything should go through me from now on. As I left her office, my phone pinged with a notification. My mother had tagged me in a Facebook post. Heartbroken that my own daughter would betray family traditions and turn her grandmother's beloved home into a commercial property against our wishes. Some people forget where they came from. The post had already garnered several sympathetic comments from family friends and relatives, most expressing shock at my selfishness and offering support to my parents. My mother had crafted a narrative where I was the villain, and people were buying it without question. I showed Leah the post that evening. This is a smear campaign, she said angrily. They're trying to pressure you through social humiliation. That night, I received the first of several voicemails from my father. His voice was cold and threatening in a way I'd never heard before. You've made a big mistake getting a lawyer involved, Ashley. Your mother is devastated. If you think the family is going to stand by while you destroy your grandmother's legacy, you're sadly mistaken. Drop this now or you'll regret it. Each subsequent message grew more hostile. By the third voicemail, he was threatening to contest the will, claiming my grandmother had been unduly influenced by me. It was completely untrue, but fighting such accusations would be expensive and emotionally draining. Meanwhile, relatives began taking sides. My Aunt Carol, my mother's sister, called to tell me how disappointed she was in my greed. 2 cousins unfriended me on social media. My Uncle Pete, Dad's brother, emailed to suggest I do the right thing before this gets ugly. Only my grandmother's sister, Aunt Patricia, reached out with kindness. This isn't what Eleanor would have wanted, she said when she called. She left you that house because she trusted you. Don't let them bully you. 3 days after I retained Sophia, Jason asked to meet me for coffee. He looked tired and uncomfortable as he stirred sugar into his latte. They're planning to sell the house to developers, he blurted out. They've been in talks for months, even before you announced the gallery idea. The company wants to tear it down and build luxury condos. I felt physically ill. They want to demolish Grandma's house? The house that's been in our family for generations. Jason nodded miserably. The property is worth more than the house itself. The developers are offering $2 million. And when were they planning to tell me this? It's my house, Jason. He looked down. They thought you'd eventually give in if they applied enough pressure. The developers have a deadline. If they can't close by the end of the quarter, they're moving on to another property. Suddenly everything made sense. The urgency, the extreme measures, the public pressure campaign. This wasn't just about family tradition or my gallery plans. It was about money, pure and simple. The financial pressure was mounting for me as well. I was paying for a lawyer, buying new essentials to replace items still locked in the house, and covering Leah's utilities and groceries to compensate for my extended stay. My savings were rapidly depleting. Work was becoming difficult too. Though my boss was understanding when I explained I was dealing with a family emergency, my performance was suffering. I missed deadlines, spaced out during meetings, and struggled to focus on creative tasks. The client I'd secured in Chicago was already expressing concerns about our preliminary concepts. Leah remained my rock through it all, but I could tell my presence was beginning to strain our friendship. Her 1-bedroom apartment wasn't designed for 2 people, and her boyfriend was clearly annoyed by my constant presence. You can stay as long as you need, Leah insisted when I brought it up. Brian understands. But I could see the strain in her eyes. I needed to resolve the situation, one way or another. Sophia called with an update a week after our initial meeting. The hearing for the emergency injunction is scheduled for next Monday. The judge assigned to the case is fair but conservative. She'll follow the law, which is in our favor, but we need to be extremely well prepared. What about my parents? Have they responded? They've retained counsel. Richard Baxter. Sophia's tone conveyed that this wasn't good news. He's aggressive, specializes in family disputes over property. He'll try to paint you as manipulative, claim you coerced your grandmother. That's ridiculous. I would never. I know. But be prepared for it to get ugly. These types of cases often do. That night, I lay awake on Leah's couch, staring at the ceiling. The people who had raised me, who had taught me right from wrong, were now willing to lie, to destroy my reputation and relationships, all for money. It was a betrayal so profound I could barely comprehend it. But beneath the hurt, anger was building, a fierce, protective anger that would ultimately give me the strength to fight back. The morning of the hearing, I dressed carefully in a conservative navy blue dress and low heels, my hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. Sophia had advised me to look respectful and sympathetic in court. First impressions matter, she said as we met outside the courthouse. Judges are human too. We were reviewing our strategy one last time when my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Normally I would have ignored it, but something made me answer. "Is this Ashley Parker?" a male voice asked. "Yes, who's calling?" "Officer Daniels, Boston Police Department. We need you to come down to the station to answer some questions about stolen property." My blood ran cold. "Stolen property? What are you talking about?" "We've received a report that you removed valuable items from your parents' residence without permission. Specifically, family heirlooms including jewelry and documents." I was speechless for a moment, then looked at Sophia in panic. She immediately took the phone. "This is Sophia Chin, Ms. Parker's attorney. What exactly is she being accused of?" I could only hear Sophia's side of the conversation, but it was enough to understand what was happening. My parents had filed a police report claiming I had stolen my grandmother's jewelry and important family documents, the very items they had kept when they locked me out. "My client will not be coming to the station today as we have a court hearing," Sophia said firmly. "Furthermore, the items in question are her legal property, left to her by her grandmother. We'll be happy to address these false allegations after today's hearing." She hung up and turned to me, her expression grim. "This is a common tactic. They're trying to intimidate you and create a counter-narrative. If they can paint you as a thief, it undermines your credibility about the house." "They're lying to the police," I said, my voice shaking. "My own parents are filing false police reports against me." "Focus on the hearing," Sophia said, squeezing my arm. "One battle at a time." Inside the courtroom, I saw my parents for the first time since they'd changed the locks. My mother avoided eye contact, staring straight ahead with her jaw clenched. My father glared at me openly, his face flushed with anger. Jason sat behind them, looking miserable. The hearing proceeded with clinical efficiency. Sophia presented the will, the deed transfer documents, and evidence of the illegal lockout. My parents' attorney, a sharp-featured man with cold eyes, argued that I had abandoned the property voluntarily and that my parents were merely securing it in my absence. Ms. Parker announced plans to fundamentally alter the historic family home against her grandmother's expressed wishes, he claimed. Her parents, as the previous heirs apparent, were acting to preserve the property's intended character. The judge, an older woman with penetrating eyes, seemed unimpressed by this argument. "The will is quite clear, Mr. Baxter. Ms. Parker is the legal owner of the property. Whether her renovation plans honor or dishonor her grandmother's memory is not a legal question before this court." She turned to my parents. "Mr. and Mrs. Parker, you had legal avenues available if you wished to contest the will. Changing locks and removing the legal owner's possessions was not one of them." My mother began to cry, while my father's face darkened further. The judge continued, addressing their attorney. "I'm granting the emergency injunction. Miss Parker is to be given immediate access to her property. All personal belongings are to be returned within 24 hours. If anything is missing or damaged, there will be further consequences." It should have felt like victory, but all I felt was hollow. As we left the courtroom, I heard my father hiss to my mother, "This isn't over." Not by a long shot. Outside, Sophia was discussing next steps when a police officer approached us. "Ashley Parker?" I nodded, my stomach clenching. "I need to ask you some questions about the stolen items reported by Margaret and Robert Parker." Despite Sophia's legal explanations, I had to endure the humiliation of being questioned about theft in front of the courthouse. Several colleagues from neighboring offices witnessed the scene, and I could feel their curious stares. The next day, as I was preparing to reclaim my house, my boss called me into his office. "Ashley, is everything okay? I've heard some concerning things." My heart sank. "What kind of things?" He looked uncomfortable. "There are rumors that you're involved in some kind of legal trouble. Something about theft? And a client mentioned seeing a social media post about you turning a historic home into a commercial property against preservation guidelines." I realized with horror that my parents' campaign had reached my professional life. The client who had seen the post was likely the one I'd just signed in Chicago, the account I'd been struggling with since the lockout. "It's a personal matter that's being resolved," I said, trying to sound confident. "My grandmother left me her house, and there's been a family disagreement about it. Everything is being handled legally." He nodded, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. "Just make sure it doesn't affect your work. The Westfield account is too important to lose." That afternoon, with a locksmith and a police escort, Sophia's precautionary measure, I finally re-entered my home. The sight that greeted me was devastating. While nothing was overtly damaged, the house had been picked clean of anything valuable or sentimental. My grandmother's antique desk where I'd worked was empty, its drawers removed. The walls were bare where family photos had hung. Even the vintage copper pots that had always hung in the kitchen were gone. "Document everything," Sophia reminded me, taking photos with her phone. "This is contempt of court." The police officer accompanying us looked uncomfortable. "You might want to file a separate theft report," he suggested. The irony was bitter. My parents had accused me of theft while systematically looting the house themselves. That night, alone in the mostly empty house, the full weight of what had happened crashed down on me. My family had not just betrayed me, they had deliberately tried to destroy me legally, financially, professionally, and emotionally. They had been willing to sacrifice our relationship, my reputation, and even my grandmother's wishes, all for money. I curled up on my bare mattress, they'd taken the bedding, and sobbed until my throat was raw. I had never felt so alone, so utterly abandoned by the people who were supposed to love me most. In that darkest moment, I seriously considered giving up. Maybe I should just let them have the house. Maybe the money wasn't worth losing my family, my reputation, my peace of mind. Maybe I was being selfish, as they claimed. I reached for my phone to call Sophia, to tell her I wanted to settle, when I noticed an email notification. It was from an address I didn't recognize, with the subject line, "Your grandmother Eleanor. Important information." Curious despite my emotional exhaustion, I opened it. "Ashley, you don't know me, but I was your grandmother's nurse during her final months. There are things you should know about your parents' behavior before she passed. Please call me if you'd like to talk." It was signed Patricia Wilson with a phone number. Something about the timing felt too convenient, too perfect. Was this another of my parents' tactics? A fake nurse with manufactured evidence to further discredit me? I was about to delete it when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was from Western Massachusetts, where my grandmother's sister lived. "Hello, Ashley? It's your Aunt Patricia. I've been trying to reach you." "Aunt Patricia?" I was confused. "Did you just email me about being Grandma's nurse?" There was a pause. "No, dear. I'm not a nurse. But I do have information that might help you. Your grandmother left some things with me for safekeeping. Things she didn't want your parents to find." It was nearly midnight, but in that moment, I felt the first glimmer of hope I'd experienced in weeks. The next morning, I called in sick to work again and drove the 2 hours to Western Massachusetts, where my great-aunt Patricia lived. I hadn't seen her in years. She and my mother had fallen out long before I was born, and she rarely attended family functions. I remembered her only as a stern woman who sent thoughtful birthday cards with crisp $20 bills. Her home was a small, neat cottage surrounded by flower gardens. Despite being in her 80s, she stood straight and tall as she welcomed me at the door. "You look like Eleanor," she said, studying my face. She had that same determined expression when something mattered to her. Inside, over tea served in delicate china cups, Patricia explained why she had reached out. "Your grandmother knew that Margaret and Robert would contest the will. They'd been pressuring her to sell the house for years, ever since property values in that neighborhood started climbing." I was surprised. She never mentioned that to me. Patricia's expression hardened. "Eleanor was protecting you. Your parents became quite aggressive about it toward the end. Robert even suggested having her declared incompetent so they could make financial decisions for her. The teacup shook in my hand. They tried to have Grandma declared incompetent? They went as far as scheduling an evaluation with a geriatric psychiatrist. Eleanor was furious. That's when she decided to leave everything to you instead of splitting it as she'd originally planned. Patricia rose and went to a roll-top desk in the corner. From a hidden compartment, she removed a manila envelope. She gave me these for safekeeping. Said if anything happened after she was gone, I should make sure you got them. Inside the envelope, I found several documents, a handwritten letter from my grandmother explaining her decision to leave me the house, copies of emails between my parents and real estate developers dating back 2 years. And most damning of all, a recording on a small USB drive. Patricia played it for me on her computer. It was my grandmother's voice, steady and clear, documenting a conversation where my parents had threatened to put her in a nursing home if she didn't agree to sell the house. I'm of sound mind and body, my grandmother's voice declared on the recording. I'm making this record because I fear my daughter and son-in-law may attempt to challenge my will. My decision to leave my home to my granddaughter Ashley is made freely and with full understanding of my actions. Tears streamed down my face as I listened. Patricia handed me a tissue. She loved you very much, she said gently. She trusted you to do right by that house when she couldn't trust her own daughter. Back in Boston, I immediately took the materials to Sophia. She reviewed everything carefully, her expression growing increasingly confident. This changes everything, she said, holding up the USB drive. The recording alone proves your grandmother was of sound mind and was being pressured by your parents. The emails to developers show premeditation in their actions against you. What do we do now? We go on the offensive. She began typing rapidly on her computer. I'm filing for a more permanent injunction and adding claims for harassment and intentional infliction of emotional distress. That afternoon, Sophia received an email from my parents' attorney. The subject line read simply, "We have a problem." The body of the email requested an urgent meeting to discuss settlement options. Recent developments have altered our client's position, it stated. We believe it would be in everyone's best interest to resolve this matter privately. Sophia smiled grimly. They know we have something. They just don't know what. 2 days later, we met in a conference room at Sophia's office. My parents looked diminished somehow. My mother's usually perfect makeup couldn't hide her exhausted eyes, and my father's confident posture had given way to a slight stoop. Jason sat beside them, refusing to meet my gaze. Their attorney, Mr. Baxter, maintained his cold professionalism. My clients are prepared to return all items removed from the property and to formally acknowledge Ms. Parker's ownership, he began. In exchange, we ask that she drop all additional claims and agree not to pursue criminal charges. Sophia leaned forward. That's not nearly enough. My client has suffered significant damages, financial, emotional, and reputational. She's lost income, incurred unnecessary expenses, and been subjected to a deliberate campaign to destroy her standing in both her family and professional communities. We can discuss reasonable compensation, Baxter conceded, looking uncomfortable. Before we go further, Sophia said, I think it's important for everyone to understand the evidence we now have. She played a portion of my grandmother's recording. My mother gasped, and my father's face went ashen. As you can hear, Eleanor Parker was quite clear about her intentions and her concerns regarding undue influence from your clients, not from mine. We also have documentary evidence of their plans to sell the property to developers, dating back to before Mrs. Parker's death. Baxter asked for a brief recess to confer with his clients. When they returned, the atmosphere had completely changed. My parents wouldn't look at me at all now, and Baxter's tone was conciliatory. My clients are prepared to make a full retraction of any statements suggesting Ms. Parker acted inappropriately, to return all items removed from the property, and to pay compensation for her temporary displacement and emotional distress. The negotiations continued for several hours, eventually resulting in a settlement that felt like vindication. My parents would publicly apologize, return everything they had taken, pay my legal fees and additional damages, and, perhaps most importantly, agree to stay away from the property unless specifically invited. As we were preparing to leave, Jason approached me hesitantly. "Ash, I'm sorry. I didn't know about all of this. I mean, I knew they were upset about the house, but I never thought they'd go this far." I regarded my brother coolly. "You stood by and watched while they tried to destroy me, Jason. I was caught in the middle. They're our parents. And I'm your sister. You chose a side. I gathered my papers. I'm not sure when I'll be ready to talk to you again." His face fell, but I couldn't find it in myself to comfort him. The betrayal was still too fresh, too deep. Outside, as Sophia and I walked to our cars, she touched my arm. "This is a good outcome, Ashley. Better than most of these cases. But I want you to be prepared. Family reconciliation after something like this is rare. Are you okay with that possibility?" I thought about it, about the depth of what my parents had been willing to do to me, and nodded slowly. "I think I'm just starting to understand who they really are," I said. "And maybe that's the most valuable thing to come out of all this." The formal settlement meeting took place in a sterile conference room downtown. My parents sat across from me, looking smaller than I remembered. My mother's perfectly manicured nails tapped nervously on the table while my father stared at some middle distance, his jaw tight. Sophia had prepared me for this moment. "Stay calm and focused," she'd advised. "This isn't about emotion now, it's about protecting your future." Our attorneys did most of the talking as we reviewed the terms. My parents would return all items removed from the house within 48 hours. They would issue written retractions to anyone they had contacted about me, including my workplace. They would pay my legal fees plus $50,000 in damages, and they would maintain a distance of at least 100 yards from the property unless specifically invited by me. "These terms are excessive," my father muttered at one point. His attorney placed a warning hand on his arm. "Robert, we've discussed this." When it came time to sign, my mother's hand trembled slightly. She looked up at me, her eyes searching mine for some sign of softening. "Ashley, this is still your family," she said quietly. "Is all this really necessary?" I met her gaze steadily. "You filed false police reports against me. You tried to destroy my career. You took Grandma's things she wanted me to have. So yes, it's necessary." My father's face flushed with anger. "You've always been stubborn, just like your grandmother. This house has torn this family apart." "No," I replied evenly. "Your actions tore this family apart. The house was just an excuse." After they signed, Jason approached me in the hallway. Unlike our parents, he had seemed genuinely affected by the evidence Aunt Patricia had provided. "I should have stood up for you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I was a coward." I wasn't ready to forgive him yet, but I recognized the sincerity in his remorse. "Yes, you should have. But you're here now, acknowledging it. That's something. Can we talk sometime? Maybe coffee next week?" I nodded cautiously. "Maybe. I'll text you." The process of reclaiming my space began with a thorough cleaning. Leah and 2 other friends helped me sage every room, open all the windows, and scrub away the lingering energy of betrayal. We ordered pizza and drank wine on the porch, deliberately creating new, positive memories in the space. To Ashley, Leah toasted, raising her glass. Who didn't just get her house back, she got her power back. The return of my grandmother's belongings was supervised by our attorneys. 2 moving companies arrived with boxes and furniture that had been removed. I checked each item against the inventory we'd created, noting what was still missing. "The jewelry box isn't here," I pointed out. "Neither is her journal about the house." My mother, who had come despite the agreement, with permission from my attorney, spoke up. "The jewelry box is in our safe deposit box." "The journal." She hesitated. "I may have thrown it out in anger." "I'm sorry." The loss of the journal felt like losing a piece of my grandmother all over again. I turned away to hide sudden tears. "If it turns up, you'll return it immediately," Sophia said firmly. Once my parents and the movers left, I sat alone in my grandmother's parlor, the room I still planned to convert into a gallery, surrounded by boxes of returned possessions. It should have felt like victory, but instead, I felt strangely empty. The house was mine again, legally and physically. But the family I had known was gone forever. Even if we eventually rebuilt some kind of relationship, it would never be the same. They had shown me who they truly were, and that knowledge could never be erased. I began the slow process of reorganizing my life. First, I had to repair the professional damage. My boss was understanding once I explained the situation and showed him the formal retraction my parents had signed acknowledging their misleading statements about me. "Family business can get ugly," he said sympathetically. "Take the time you need to get settled, but we need you back at full capacity soon." The Westfield account is still wobbly. I threw myself into work with renewed focus, determined to prove my value. Within a few weeks, the Westfield campaign was back on track, and I even secured a small additional contract with them. The community reaction was mixed. Some neighbors who had known my grandmother expressed support once they understood what had happened. Others, friends of my parents, remained cool and distant. I decided not to waste energy trying to win everyone over. The truth was on my side, documented and legally acknowledged. I proceeded with my plans for the art gallery, hiring an architect who specialized in historic renovations to ensure the conversion honored the house's character. The process was healing, a way of fulfilling my promise to my grandmother while asserting my vision. Jason and I began a cautious reconciliation over weekly coffee meetings. Unlike our parents, he seemed genuinely remorseful and eager to repair our relationship. "They're not handling this well," he admitted during one of our conversations. "Dad's drinking more and Mom barely leaves the house. They feel humiliated." I didn't humiliate them, I pointed out. Their own actions did that. "I know. I'm not defending them. I just thought you should know." I appreciated his honesty, even if I wasn't ready to extend an olive branch to our parents. The wounds were still too fresh, the betrayal too profound. The first holiday season was the hardest. Thanksgiving had always been at my grandmother's house, now my house. With my mother orchestrating an elaborate meal and my father carving the turkey. This year, I hosted a Friendsgiving instead, filling the dining room with people who had supported me through the crisis. "It's different," Leah observed as we washed dishes afterward. "But maybe better in some ways? No tension, no walking on eggshells around your mom's feelings." She was right. The celebration had been relaxed and joyful, without the undercurrents of criticism and competition that had characterized family gatherings. That night, after everyone left, I sat in my grandmother's favorite chair by the fireplace and allowed myself to really feel the mixture of grief and liberation that had been swirling inside me. I had lost my family as I knew it, but I had gained something perhaps more valuable, the knowledge that I could stand firm in my truth, even when everyone was against me. The gallery opened in the spring, featuring work by local artists who focused on themes of home, memory, and transformation. The opening night drew a surprising crowd, including several neighbors who had initially been skeptical of my plans. "Your grandmother would have loved this," one elderly neighbor told me, gesturing to the thoughtfully curated space. "She always said this house needed young energy." My brother came too, bringing a small housewarming gift, a vintage photograph of our grandmother standing on the porch, smiling broadly. "Found it in an old album at Mom and Dad's," he explained. "Thought it belonged here." As guests mingled and admired the artwork, I felt my grandmother's presence strongly, as if she were moving through the rooms alongside me, approving of how I'd honored her legacy while making the space my own. For the first time since the locks had been changed all those months ago, I felt truly at home. 1 year after the court hearing that returned my house to me, I stood in what was now a thriving gallery space, hosting an exhibition of photography focused on family dynamics across generations. The symbolism wasn't lost on me or the friends who had supported me through the ordeal. Full circle moment, Leah whispered as we surveyed the crowded room. The year had been one of profound transformation. The house itself had evolved from a battleground to a sanctuary. I'd completed the renovations with meticulous care, preserving historical details while creating a space that reflected my own aesthetic sensibilities. The gallery portion operated 3 days a week, providing enough income to offset maintenance costs without disrupting the neighborhood. My professional life had not just recovered, but flourished. The determination I discovered during the conflict translated into a newfound confidence at work. I'd been promoted to creative director, with a team of my own and the freedom to pursue projects I found meaningful. My relationship with Jason had gradually been rebuilt on a foundation of honesty rather than obligatory family ties. Our weekly coffees had evolved into genuine friendship as he worked to understand his role in what had happened and make amends. I was afraid of standing up to them, he admitted during one of our deeper conversations. I've always been afraid of their disapproval. Watching you fight back taught me something important about courage. He had recently moved into an apartment just a few blocks from me, a physical symbol of his choice to align himself with his sister rather than our parents. My parents themselves remained a complicated wound. We had limited, carefully controlled contact, occasional text messages, a brief meeting in a neutral location on my birthday. The relationship was formal, stripped of pretense. I no longer expected the unconditional love they had proven incapable of providing, and that clarity was its own form of freedom. They're never going to be the parents you deserved, my therapist had told me during one of our sessions. Accepting that is part of your healing. I had found unexpected family in other places. Aunt Patricia had become a regular presence in my life, visiting monthly and sharing stories about my grandmother I'd never heard before. Leah and my other close friends had proven themselves more loyal than blood relatives. Even some of the artists who exhibited in the gallery had become part of my chosen family. The most profound change, though, was internal. The person who had received that devastating text message, "We changed all the locks. You don't have a home anymore," seemed like a different version of myself, someone who still believed that family loyalty was unconditional and that parents would always put their child's well-being above their own desires. That naive woman was gone, replaced by someone stronger, more discerning, and ultimately more peaceful. I had learned to distinguish between genuine love and conditional approval, between healthy compromise and self-erasure, between forgiveness and foolishness. The exhibition opening was winding down when I noticed a familiar figure lingering near the entrance. Jason had arrived with our mother. My heart rate spiked. This was unexpected. She hadn't been to the house since the settlement. Jason caught my eye with an apologetic look that said this hadn't been planned. I approached them cautiously. My mother looked older, more fragile than I remembered. She clutched her purse with white knuckles. "The gallery is beautiful," she said quietly. "Your grandmother would have approved." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even an acknowledgement of what she had done. But it was something, a small recognition of the rightness of my vision for the house. "Thank you for coming," I replied, maintaining the polite distance that now characterized our interactions. She nodded, eyes moving around the space, taking in the photographs of families, some joyful, others clearly depicting conflict and distance. "Is your father well?" I asked, more out of courtesy than genuine concern. "Managing his blood pressure. The doctor says he needs to reduce stress." A hint of the old accusation crept into her tone, as if my father's health problems were somehow my fault. Some things hadn't changed, but my reaction to them had. Instead of feeling guilty or defensive, I simply nodded and let the comment pass without taking its weight onto my shoulders. After they left, Jason texted, "Sorry about that. She insisted on coming when she heard where I was going. You handled it with grace." The encounter crystallized how far I'd come. A year ago, that brief, loaded interaction would have devastated me for days. Now, it was just a moment, neither defining nor destroying my peace. Later that evening, as I closed up the gallery and moved through the quiet rooms of my home, I found myself in my grandmother's study, the one room I'd kept almost exactly as it had been during her lifetime. On her desk sat a framed quote she had loved, words from Maya Angelou: "You may not control all the events that happen to you, but you can decide not to be reduced by them." That had been my grandmother's gift to me, not just the house itself, but the opportunity to discover my own strength through defending it. In trying to take my home, my parents had inadvertently forced me to find an unshakable home within myself. For anyone who's ever faced betrayal by those who should have protected you, know this: your worth isn't determined by those who failed to value you. Family is both what we're born into and what we create. Sometimes the family we choose becomes our greatest source of strength. Have you ever had to stand up to family for something that was rightfully yours? How did you handle it? Share your story in the comments below. And if this story helped you feel less alone in your own family struggles, please subscribe and hit that like button. Sometimes our deepest wounds become our greatest teachers, but we don't have to walk that journey alone. Thank you for being part of my healing by listening to my story, and I wish you strength in whatever battles you're facing today.